Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's Revizto webinar. Today, we'll look at some different techniques for exporting design models and, from some of the multiple design platforms or authoring tools that we integrate with. My name is David Ray. I'm one of the implementation service managers here at Revizto. And joining me on today's webinar, but I don't think could make it today, was Brett Settles, who is our Global Director of Customer Success. So yeah, together with our team, it's really our responsibility to get fully involved with our clients at a very deep level and ensure they have the best workflow possible. So a little bit about our team. We've broken the team up into certain aspects of industries we focus on. So I have a background in architecture, so my focus lies really with our design clients. Brett, who has a very diverse background, focuses on really all client efforts, but I would say his main area of expertise is engineering and specifically on the civil side of things. But I do like to mention that this is one of the unique things about Revizto, and that we have industry-focused professionals that are always there to jump in and help either troubleshoot things or work towards developing efficient workflows, as well as any type of training sessions needed to get up and running. So we are going to set some time aside at the end of this session today for questions. I don't think this will go the entire hour. However, if anything jumps out at you initially and you want to ask questions, just go ahead and type those in the chat and we'll make sure to review those. Yeah, as mentioned, we should have plenty of time towards the end to take questions. So just as an overview of some of the topics I want to cover, or really the reason and main intent for this webinar, is really to grow further awareness of the different tools we're a plug-in to. So in some conversations with longtime users of Revizto, we sort of discovered that not everyone is aware that we can export some of these native file types directly into Revizto. And we typically run our demos and training sessions with Revit and Navisworks. And while these are some of the more common tools when putting together construction documents and coordinating, I think on our end we could do maybe a little better job just to grow use cases and overall awareness that we can operate outside the realm of Revit or Navis. So another reason for the topics I want to talk about today, while we have very focused guides on many of these individual tools, I don't think we've put a lot of time and focus on bringing these various models from different design platforms together, excuse me, in one single Revizto environment. So just as a brief summary here, some of the things I'm going to cover. So first we'll look at some of the authoring tools we're a plug-in to. At the beginning of getting into each design platform, I do want to take a few minutes just to look at each of the plugins and how to enable those. In some cases, it's not as apparent as other tools such as Navis or Revit, where the plugin just automatically comes into the top ribbon and you're ready to export. So we'll look at that briefly. Another thing I want to focus on is the positioning of each model and the various systems you might encounter when bringing those models together in Revizto. So yeah, some positioning, is a little more straightforward than others. And in some cases, it'll make sense to use, one over the other in other platforms. So we'll look at that. And then last, I want to look at one of the newer features in Revizto 5 and how to utilize that in bringing models together. And also kind of the example scenario I put together, just look at how this will help in exporting from certain design platforms. So there's always the question of why would I want to bring different design models into Revizto? And while I didn't go into an absorbent amount of detail into, maybe where in the project lifecycle this is most useful, I do think there are, a few different reasons to use this with Revizto. Excuse me. So one of the main reasons for me is that I think there's something to be said when, exporting directly from the native file type, when bringing design models into Revizto. And we've all been there where you have to extract some file type and sort of go down the import export rabbit hole. So to kind of expand on that, I know some of these platforms do have certain avenues to take when bringing models together. I think ArchiCAD as an add-in for Revit, and Vectorworks recently released something similar, I believe. But again, if you're caught in this workflow of generating IFC files or maybe FBX files, there's sort of a pitfall to that as well, right? If you have an IFC, you do get an accurate model with the data-rich objects we all want to see in a BIM model. However, the file size can and usually does become extremely large. And in most cases, you lose the graphic qualities in the file exchange. So in the event you want to retain some of the graphic qualities, you have the option to generate an FBX in most design softwares. And while all this this whole process has gotten better, it still seems like when generating design models and federating those together in one environment, you still run into some tools that only exports one file, while others might accept another. We've all done it. It's not very fun. So the point here is that when bringing a model in directly from the design platform to Revizto, you really get the best of both worlds. So you'll get all the metadata, the model properties that come in, as well as a very accurate representation of the graphics in the model. And then regarding bringing the models together for coordination and file size, Revizto actually compresses these dramatically to make them really easily accessed and navigated. So again, for a coordination model, I think it brings in the best parts, all of the data, all of the graphics, but in a model environment that doesn't hog the GPU. And in some instances, you still have to generate an IFC, maybe for architectural backgrounds. If, for example, you design the model in one software, but you need to get that out to your consultants for their drawings. But I think as far as a coordination and review model goes, to me, it makes the most sense to come directly from the native platform where the model and sheets were generated. So another reason this is really useful is the aspect of usability, right? So maybe I'm coordinating with an outside consultant and they're using some design platform that I'm not really at all familiar with. So rather than taking the time away from the production of my project and learning this other tool, I can take it, export the model into Revizto, and then with the ease of use of Revizto, use it to do some checking on, or for tracking comments, redlining, communicating, really utilizing the issue tracker and so forth. So the last reason to use this is really some of the more obvious Revizto related reasons, right? So again, it compresses the model, makes it very lightweight, easy to move around in, but also for visualization, right? So if I'm bringing models together and being able to review all the models together in one environment with maybe owners or other stakeholders in the project, I can also utilize, again, the issue tracking system to record those coordination or review comments and, ensure they're incorporated into the design. And yeah, so I've put together a few different models in one project. So we'll look at Revit exporting, some of the positioning systems briefly, as well as Vectorworks. So we'll look at the two different positioning systems, take a look at the plugin, how to get that enabled, a little bit on exporting model alignment. Also, Rhino, we'll take a look at that first. So again, dive into the plugin, exporting, look at the origin point, some of those model alignment items, and then a few things I like to recommend for best practices, as well as SketchUp. So I brought a SketchUp model into the project as well. Again, we'll take a look at exporting, export dialog, the origin point, talk a little bit about that, and then finally, how to align those models in Revizto. And then finally, I do want to take some time to look at the transform command in Revizto 5 and really how this works for models brought in and maybe, that did not have the positioning altered in the authoring tool. So now you have a way in Revizto to kind of move those models around and align things. So yeah, what I'll do now is jump into the models I have here and kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts. So I'll start here in Rhino, and what I've done is, again, kind of created a hypothetical scenario of various file types and brought them into one Revizto project. So for Rhino, I have a kind of site massing model that I started with. In Rhino, I'll talk just briefly about how to enable the plugin. So as mentioned at the beginning, not all modeling tools are as straightforward for finding the plugin. And as far as Rhino goes, it kind of does need to be enabled. So to get the plugin enabled, you want to go to File up here, then Properties. So under your Rhino options, you'll have a plugin option, and then you'll go to Install. So the file type is typically, C, program files, Visera. In this case, I'm using Revizto 5. And then in the Revizto 5 folder, you have the bin folder. And then in the bin file, you'll want to look for the RHP file type. So if I scroll down, I should see Rhino to Revizto export 5 RHP. So once I select that, hit open, I'll be able to enable the plugin. So Rhino, from there, Rhino uses a command to find the export tools. So you simply need to type in Revizto export at the command line. And then you'll have the option for Revizto export 5, which we just looked at. So if I pop that open, I have these two. It pulls up in this pane, and then I have Revizto 4 option and Revizto 5 option, and that's essentially how I'll get to my export, bringing Rhino models in. So just some quick notes there. So I started with this model. It made the most sense to me to start with the site. However, if you have a building already modeled in Revit and bring that in first, it's fairly easy to adjust things in Rhino and bring that in afterwards. So what I like to do is generate a point or object in the model that I can easily identify my positioning point. So what I did in my massing model is created a cone object, and then I positioned my geometry to read this point at the 0, 0, 0 XYZ coordinates. So I'll be able to use this cone object here I created in Rhino, and that gives me a way to kind of easily look for my 0 origin point. Regarding origin points, Rhino uses a single origin point when creating a model. So if at any time I need to reposition the model based on where the building is going to fall into place, it's a pretty easy process. I would just move this building around in relation to this 0 point, or if I know my exact survey point, I can also move the model and position it that way. But again, for this example, and to keep things pretty simple, I just kept this at my at a 0 origin for my XYZ. So yeah, when I have my massing model in the correct alignment position, I can go back up to the command line, run the Revizto export, pull open the export dialog. And from there, I'll be able to select the view. So I want to, in this case, export my perspective view and bring it into my project by selecting export. So if I jump over to Revizto here, let me close out of this. So again, I brought the massing model in, and then with the object I drew in my massing model, I can quickly find my reference point to align other models in this scenario. And then keep in mind to double check where this model came in, or to just double check this reference point. I do have some options up here in 3D. So the small ruler icon will get me to my measurement tools. And then from there, I can use my spot elevation tool and drag that around. It should highlight green once I grab a point here. So it's going to give me the point of this object that I formatted in the 0, 0, 0 origin. And then also at the bottom of the screen, it gives me my XYZ location in the model. And I might have some tolerance things going on here where it's not grabbing the exact 0, 0, 0, but extremely close. So now, additionally with this object, I can use some of the other measurement tools if I need to grab my, snap measurement tool. So again, I can grab that point and then pretty much measure anywhere on this site massing model from this 0, 0 point. So just a quick tip, something I like to point out and recommend when bringing models together. Let's see, so now what I'll do is switch over here to Revit. So in this example, the goal here is to bring my Revit project into my site massing model and align the building to where I want it to sit on the site. So for instance, I have a project going in Revit. I've aligned these models. I have a structural and architectural linked files. And for this example, I align these models using shared coordinates. So what I want to do is bring this project in with my architectural and structural links using the shared site information. So when talking about Revit positioning, and I won't go into too much detail here, I think we could do an entire webinar on Revit positioning itself. I do want to point out that when we're in a shared coordinate system, I want to align other models and export to Revizto using the shared coordinates option in positioning. And then, also again, I'm going to align to that survey point. So I'll go into the export dialog in Revit, choose my export to Revizto. And again, just make sure in the drop-down you select shared coordinates. I know that sounds simple, but it's something we often see, thrown off here. So if I get back into Revizto, and I made sure to have these models, exported prior to this webinar, so we didn't have to look at progress bars. But I do want to mention that the work the development team did with version 5 is lightning fast export times with large models. If you ever saw that bogged down pretty bad in Revizto 4, it is extremely optimized in Revizto 5. So again, I exported my Revit model. I'll go into my objects here, find my Revit model, unhide it, and then again, I want to verify that this came in correctly. So again, I can utilize my object point I brought in from my site massing model. and verify that came in. So if I go back to Revit and reference my survey point here, just as a quick, visual inspection, it looks like that came in correctly. I wanted it to hit this point in relation to my survey point. And then also, just as a quick tip, if again I want to further verify this came in correctly, I can use my measurement tool. So for example, grab my spot elevation again, and maybe I place it at the corner of this mullion. And it, again, it gives me an XYZ, so the X 129 and then Y of 160. So in Revit, I can actually verify that if I go up to manage and then specify coordinates at a point. So I can select that same point here in the Revit model. And I won't get down to the inch, but it looks like, negative 160 and 129. So I can, verify that that did come into Revizto correct by those points. So let's see, what I'll do from here is kind of switch gears and jump into Vectorworks. So Vectorworks is a design software where, the plugin, does install when you download Revizto. However, it does take some front-end work to get to the export dialog. Right, so in Vectorworks, if I go up to Tools, under Tools here, you can get into your workspaces. From there, I can edit my current workspace. And then, what I like to do is create a new menu. So you can drag a new menu over to your existing menu options here. You can rename that. What I've done is created one for Revizto 4 and then additionally Revizto 5. So once that new menu is in there, again, rename it. And then under your commands here, this is where you'll find the export dialog. So you'll be able to take this Revizto menu, drag and drop either into an existing menu you already have set up, or what I like to recommend is in that new menu you've created. So once that's formatted, hit OK, and then you'll have these two menus up here in Vectorworks. You can select that drop down and quickly get to your Revizto 5 export dialog. So just some quick notes there. I do want to talk a little bit about the model positioning in Vectorworks. And Vectorworks is one that does some amazing things with the geolocation of the model, and also has some very advanced features for model positioning in relation to real world coordinates. However, for this example, I just kept things very simplified. But I do want to point out that there are 2 points in Vectorworks that can be used when exporting a model, into Revizto. So first, you'll have the internal origin, and that can be shifted around, I believe. However, moving that point kind of, can create some problems in the project. So if I move the internal origin and I have my sheets set up or views, et cetera, the model will move. However, some other aspects of the project might become disjoined. So there is actually another way that's handled in Vectorworks. So I can actually position this model to read a different point as opposed to the internal origin, and then export to the correct location in Revizto. And this works. So in this view, I go to a 2D plan view. So what I can do is grab my user origin up here, and then you can select yes. And it pretty much gives you the option to select a point, and then that becomes your user origin in this 3D export view I created. So again, what something I, just personal preference, something I like to do is create reference lines to set my origin. So again, I referred to my massing model, and I want to bring this building into my site in relation to this distance and this distance, and that's where you can see at the far end of these rulers is going to be my 0, 0 origin point. So I'm going to drop the model in relation to that point. Let's see. So, again, along those measured points is where I want to bring the model in. Let's see. But yeah, completely personal preference. Anyway, I should be ready to export. So I do want to look at the export dialog really quickly out of Vectorworks, because this is something that might be a little confusing for Vectorworks users. So I go to my plugin, right? I choose to export to Revizto, and I have these as my positioning options. So I'll have, shared coordinates, origin to origin, base point to base point. And the reason this could throw some users off is that, these options are kind of specific to Revit. However, if I choose my base point to base point or origin options, that'll actually pick up the internal origin out of Vectorworks and export it to Revizto, to that 0, 0, 0 point in relation to where the internal origin is. But if I actually choose shared coordinates, it'll pick up the user origin we just looked at and align the model along this point. So just some quick notes and tips there. I think, again, I think that's a helpful option, not only because by moving the internal origin, you might create, other additional obstacles by having to reformat sheets, or, for example, if you're the architect on the project using Vectorworks and your consulting engineers are doing some of the modeling or documentation in Revit, it gives you that flexibility to find a survey point or find a base point in Revit, align the model, and not have to really move the entire project around. So again, shared coordinates in the export dialog, you can gather that point and drop the model in place. So again, I'll take a look in Revizto and just verify that came in correct. So I'll go to my object tool here and unhide my model. And again, just on visual inspection, if I go to Vectorworks, I want to make sure I drop the model in on this point from these two distances. And in Revizto, again, using my object as a reference point of the cone I brought in from Rhino, I wanted to come this way and this way, a certain distance, and looks like it came in really nice. Vectorworks, I also want to point out, does have some really nice XYZ reference points in certain views. If you simply move your cursor around, it'll give you that XYZ point if that's helpful, just as a quick reference. But again, in Revizto, I can go up to my measurement tools, grab my spot elevation, place that on the model, and ensure that came in. Let's see. So lastly, I want to look at Sketchup. So I also brought a Sketchup model into this project, in this purely hypothetical example. And maybe you're doing a master planning exercise and want to bring in additional design models. Or maybe you have multiple firms working on one project, and between the firms they're using different design softwares. So I'll go ahead and switch over here to Sketchup. Let's see. Oh, another point I wanted to make is if you, for example, want to design something in SketchUp or Rhino, and maybe for instance I want to bring that into my Revizto project, and maybe maybe it's some type of trellis design I want to set on this building. And maybe Revit, is too rigid of a tool to create what I want. Anyway, just throwing some use cases out there, if anyone sees value in that, being able to, bring those two different design platforms together in one Revizto environment to, verify and check and use the communication tools really would be the point there. But if I jump into SketchUp here, I have my project set up and say I want to bring that into Revizto. So first I want to point out that SketchUp is a modeling platform that does enable the plug-in upon downloading Revizto. So, unlike some of the other tools we just looked at, you'll have the icons up here and you can move these around, but, super simple, not much front end work to get those up and running and be ready to export. Excuse me. So next I'll talk a little bit about positioning with SketchUp. So SketchUp, similar to Rhino, uses this single origin point. Right, so here I always have a reference of where my XYZ location is. And one unique thing about SketchUp is I do have the option to move this point around the model. Right, so if I right click here, I can actually move this to a certain XYZ point. But something to note about this, for example, if I move this, maybe 100 feet in the X direction and 100 feet in the Y direction, really all it's doing is moving that point to be able to reference the building. So as it relates to exporting to Revizto, it's really only going to pick up that one single internal 000 origin point, excuse me, based in SketchUp. So, you would think that if I move this, it's going to pick up the moved, 000 location, but, just pointing that out. Once I move that, that does not automatically become my export point. And then a way to double check that is if I, again, right click on that, I'll have the option to reset here come available, where, if I reset that and it's actually in its internal origin place, I no longer have the option to reset that. So if you've moved this point to a certain location and you're exporting to Revizto and can't figure out why it's not picking that point up, just know that, it's always going to read that reset, again, internal 000. Let's see. So I think that another thing worth mentioning is that I can always, move the entire model around as far as positioning and maybe even dimension off my origin. But I think this comes with a catch with SketchUp, right? So for example, if I want to move this entire building to a certain point in the project that I want to bring it into Revizto with, kind of like the internal origin example in Vectorworks, I might have some things thrown off here in my design model. So I think one thing that's definitely altered by, if I were to move this entire building is some of the views I created. So if I look up here, or excuse me, scenes, they're called. I have certain scenes set up in my SketchUp project. These are related to a certain camera point, but also where the building sits. So if, the point being, if I move this entire model, I pretty much have to recreate all these scenes that I just, just formatted here in this model. So again, I think it creates extra work, if you're going to move the entire model in relation to this point and bring it into Revizto. Yeah, so what options do I really have? And that kind of leads me into one of the newer features that we've made available in Revizto 5, which is the transform function. So now if I have a model that comes in at a certain point, so again, I will go ahead and unhide my Sketchup building. And again, using my object to be able to reference that point in my site model. And then, so again, switching back to SketchUp here, I can ensure that, this reset internal origin in SketchUp did come into the correct location to Revizto. However, that's really not where I want the building to sit, right? So what can I really do? Well, in Revizto 5, we've enabled a additional function. So at the parent file level of each of these, native file types, for instance, my SketchUp building, so I can right click on this in the object tree. At the very bottom of these options, I have the scene transform, which is new to Revizto 5 again. And then if I know the point in this site model that I want this building to land, I can actually adjust that directly in Revizto. So not so much relying on some of the authoring tools anymore. We can actually shift things around directly here in the 3D environment. So for example, if I know this building needs to be 200 foot in the X direction and negative 280 feet in the Y direction, and then I want to spin it around 180 degrees about the vector. So once I've done that, you can see now we can, at the parent file level, move buildings around directly in Revizto. But I think to expand on that, SketchUp, a few other platforms, are definitely tools that would benefit from this dramatically. Personally, I think a lot of these models, when bringing them together for coordination purposes, ideally should be aligned beforehand just to keep things consistent. But in reality, a model might move around or something in the project shifts. All kinds of things can go wrong. So yeah, just wanted to formally introduce that as a new tool to Revizto 5. And I think there's, tremendous use cases for that. Again, it'll happen at the parent file level. So I could move any of these buildings I brought in from exporting with the scene transform. And then the scene transform works off of decimal feet. So no need to put in your foot notations or anything like that. You would just move this about your coordinate system, hit OK, and then have that model fall into place. Another, couple quick things regarding the transform tool. If I, for example, want to make some changes in this SketchUp model, Revit model, or Vectorworks model, and I have a transform applied to these positions in Revizto, upon re-exporting those models into Revizto, it'll actually hold and retain those transform points. So I only have to move these models around once. Once they're aligned, any updates I make or any re-exporting I do to Revizto, it will hold those positions. As well as
you care if I say something real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so sorry to jump in and interrupt, but another key thing that I want to point out with the transform command is if you are using ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, anything that has 2D sheets related to it, those 2D sheets will move with the model. So you don't have to worry about disconnecting your sheets with the model as we move all of the data associated with the file.
Definitely, yeah. I was just going to mention that, but you beat me to it, Brett.
Oh, sorry, David. Didn't mean to step on your toes there.
Nope, all good. Yeah, so I mean, I think for the most part, that's really the main points I wanted to hit on today. And I don't know if we have any questions or you were able to jump into that at all, Brett. But
so I didn't want to interrupt you, so I don't have access to question and answer. But if you want to throw it open and see if we've got any, we can answer them live.
See, it looks like it looks like no open questions, so must have been
There you go.
pretty clear.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, with all the various platforms used to generate different types of models, all the way from, you know, conceptual design through schematic and up into actual detailed design and the creation of construction documents, this really gives everyone a unique way to bring all of that information together and even get that information out to people who don't have access to any of those platforms that these models are being generated in. So it really kind of democratizes the process, even if you're using, you know, 3, 4, 5 different design platforms at various stages of the product or project. And that's where we really see a ton of value. And of course, we didn't cover it today, but everything, you know, interconnects to our issue tracking system, our 2D markups, all of our reporting. So it also gives you a good way to quantify and make sure that accountability is driven on things that are happening across all of these different authoring platforms.
Definitely. Yeah, excellent point.
Yep, and Mark Jones asking a question. So Mark asked, can you also load Civil 3D on top of this? And the answer is absolutely you can. Civil 3D is going to, you know, function the same way with the transform commands as well as importing that. And a bonus in 5.0 when dealing with Civil 3D is that now, since we have various search sets and visibility options in Revizto 5, instead of cleaning up that Civil 3D model in Navisworks, you can actually do that cleanup, that visual cleanup inside of Revizto, really streamlining that workflow with the civil data.
Definitely. Great question, Mark. Sounds good. I mean, it looks like that's really it as far as open questions. Unless anybody has anything else, we can conclude here. And hopefully, this was helpful for everyone and gives you kind of a more insight into the file types we can export from and bring together in a Revizto project. So yeah, before we jump off, Brett, anything you want to add?
No, I think that you covered it well, and I think that this is important for a lot of people looking to use Revizto with, you know, multi that are utilizing different design tools across a project, especially in those conceptual phases. You know, as design moves on in both architecture, which I'm not as familiar with as I am, you know, the engineering part, but eventually it all comes into Revit for that detailed design. But there's a whole portion of projects that happen before everything gets into Revit. And that's really what this was focused on, is how to bring that information together. And then as the project pushes more towards that detailed design and starts to come together in that design tool of choice, you still have all of that historical information about how the concept was put together and all the thought that went in before that project goes into detailed design. So, you know, it's a part of the workflow that we find a lot of value in. It may not be our most popular workflow, but it is available. And that's what this webinar was really about, was highlighting the things that you can do in this phase that I don't think a lot of people really understand up until this point.
Definitely. Yep. Sounds good, guys. Well, I'll go ahead and end it here. And thanks, everyone, for jumping on, and take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.